The morning sky was steel gray and heavy with low clouds, the kind that pressed down on the runway, making every sound echo and every movement feel amplified. Captain Elena Ramirez stood by her jet, the A-10 gleaming wet under the drizzle her call. Sign Iron Widow stitched boldly on her flight suit. The SEAL Admiral approached, his face lined with years of experience and a hint of disbelief. He looked at her and chuckled, shaking his head as if the name were some kind of joke meant for amusement, rather than respect. Elena met his gaze, her eyes sharp, unwavering, the weight of her training and experience evident in the straight set of her shoulders. The hangar doors opened to the damp morning air, and the roar of engines from nearby aircraft filled the space. The SEALs under the Admiral's command moved with precision, their eyes on the new pilot, some skeptical, others curious as they had heard whispers of the woman who flew solo through hostile skies and returned without a scratch. Each man felt tension in the pit of his stomach at the thought of testing skill against the environment in which Iron Widow thrived. Yet Elena remained calm, her hands resting lightly on the controls, checking instruments and systems, the A-10 ready to respond to every command. The Admiral stepped closer, still smiling faintly, disbelief tugging at the edges of his expression. He leaned slightly and asked her again if the call sign was a joke, as though daring her to prove it. The hint of challenge in his tone was unmistakable, and Elena allowed a slow grin to form. She knew the test was coming, and she was ready. She lifted her helmet and placed it securely over her head, systems and comms activating, lights blinking softly across the cockpit. The engines hummed to life, a deep metallic growl vibrating through the soles of her boots. Outside, the storm clouds shifted and a light drizzle turned heavier, the runway slick with rain and reflections of muted sunlight. Every man and woman in the hangar paused to watch as Elena taxied the A-10 toward the end of the strip. Her movements precise, calculated, a predator gliding through territory she had mapped and memorized for countless simulations. The Admiral stepped back, instinctively feeling the raw power of the aircraft, coupled with the undeniable presence of the pilot controlling it with absolute authority. Each second of her approach built tension in the air as the storm above threatened to mask everything that would come next. Elena flicked switches, sequences executed without hesitation, the HUD lighting up tracking systems, locking onto simulated targets for the morning drills. The SEALs watched, their eyes widening at her skill, speed, and confidence as she maneuvered the A-10 in ways that seemed impossible to those who had not trained under such pressure. Each roll, each climb, each sharp bank was calculated but appeared effortless, a seamless dance of metal fire and instinct. The Admiral's eyes narrowed in surprise, the corners of his mouth lifting briefly before disappearing as he realized the joke had not been in the call sign, but in his own doubt. The radar pinged low-altitude threats, simulated yet approaching quickly. Elena adjusted her flight path banking sharply to avoid imaginary fire. Yet her movements were perfect in precision and timing. Her comms clicked as she coordinated maneuvers, keeping the formation of drones aligned, simulating hostile aircraft. Each adjustment displayed an intuitive understanding of battlefield mechanics combined with courage few could fathom. Her eyes flicked across the instruments, scanning for changes in pressure, wind, and speed, maintaining control over every variable that could threaten mission success. Suddenly, the Admiral caught a glimpse of her executing a roll dive and climb in succession, flawlessly threading through markers and obstacles without hesitation. His hand flew to his chest, instinctively surprised by the speed and audacity of her actions. The SEALs froze mid-step, watching the A-10 tear through the simulated battlefield as though possessed by some preternatural skill. The storm above reflected the aircraft's movement, the clouds splitting momentarily, lightning illuminating the cockpit just long enough for every observer to see Elena's calm, focused expression as she mastered the impossible. She leveled the jet, suddenly coming within feet of the simulated target, triggering a sequence that displayed perfect engagement tactics and damage assessment. All the while, her helmet comms relayed crisp, clear instructions to the ground simulation team, orchestrating each move with authority and confidence. The Admiral stepped back further, his mind racing, processing the display of skill, courage, and nerve that the name Iron Widow implied, all of which had just come alive before his eyes, leaving him speechless for a moment, the weight of his disbelief colliding with undeniable reality. The A-10 slowed at the end of the strip. Elena taxied smoothly to a stop, engines growling under control and the storm mist curling around the nose of the jet. The SEALs broke into murmurs, exchanging looks of astonishment and respect. The Admiral remained frozen in place, stepping back almost, reverently finally realizing that the call sign was not a joke, but a warning, a statement, and a promise, all at once. That single demonstration left a tension in the air that no one could quite dispel as they all waited silently for what would come. Next, leaving the story suspended between awe-anticipation and the knowledge that Elena Ramirez was far more than anyone had dared to believe. The storm above the airfield thickened, clouds rolling and twisting as the drizzle intensified, making visibility. Near zero, Elena Ramirez eased the A-10 into a holding pattern, wings cutting through wind and rain like blades. The SEALs watched from below, tension coiling in their chests, muscles tight with anticipation. They had seen her skill in simulation, but now the real storm added another layer of danger, unpredictability, and fear. Each second in the air made the demonstration more real, more visceral as the aircraft tilted and roared above them. Captain Morales adjusted his stance, hands resting on, his belt scanning the sky, every shadow and flash of lightning a potential threat. His mind raced, calculating the forces acting on the aircraft, wind shear, turbulence, and visibility, all factors Elena handled effortlessly. The ground simulation team attempted to track her movements, calling out coordinates and markers, but the storm made communication crackle and distort. Yet Elena responded instantaneously, each correction precise, flawless and instinctive, as if she and the A-10 were a single entity moving through the chaos with absolute control. Jenkins squinted against the rain, watching the aircraft dip into clouds, disappear, then reappear, performing rolls, dives, and climbs at impossible speeds. The SEALs whispered among themselves, their doubt melting into awe. Each maneuver seemed more daring than the last, banking sharply to avoid simulated obstacles, flying dangerously close to the ground, and then climbing steeply, threading through imaginary enemy fire. Elena's hands moved with absolute certainty, controls responding to her every thought and instinct. The roar of the engines mixed with the wind like a symphony of power, fear, and precision. The Admiral stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the aircraft, disbelief written across his face. The call sign. Iron Widow had seemed audacious, bold, perhaps even flippant, but now the reality was undeniable. He had underestimated not just skill, but nerve, courage, and intuition. Every movement displayed a mastery of the sky that left him momentarily frozen. Each dive, roll, and climb created a sense of suspense for the watching SEALs as they waited to see how she would navigate the storm and the impossible scenarios being thrown at her. Suddenly, a sharp warning from the radar comms crackled, signaling simulated enemy interceptors approaching fast. Elena adjusted her trajectory, banking sharply to the right and then rolling left to evade the incoming threat. The SEALs gasped at the precision timing, the perfect alignment of maneuvers that avoided every simulated strike while keeping her trajectory steady for engagement. Each correction executed flawlessly, the aircraft twisting and turning, slicing through wind and rain as though it were alive, responding directly to her mind, commands, instincts, and training. Captain Morales leaned forward, eyes narrowing, sweat mixing with rain dripping down his face, every fiber of his body tense with anticipation, The ground markers blurred in the storm, making coordination harder. But Elena's focus never wavered. Every system light on the dashboard monitored and corrected. She moved seamlessly, keeping engagement windows aligned and tracking simulated targets with absolute control. The roar of engines echoed against the storm. Clouds thunder, barely audible beneath the growl of metal and power, each moment suspended in tense anticipation of what she would do next. Jenkins clenched his fists as the A-10 performed a low-altitude pass nearly skimming the wet tarmac before, pulling sharply upward and executing a precise roll climb sequence. The SEALs held their breath, their hearts pounding as they witnessed impossible coordination skill and nerve. Their skepticism evaporated, replaced by awe and respect. The call sign, Iron Widow, now etched in their minds as not a name, but a symbol. A warning and a promise rolled into one. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cockpit for a brief second, revealing Elena's calm face, focused and determined. She adjusted the throttle, banking again to line up a simulated strike, pulling back just enough to avoid obstacle markers and debris placed on the training field. The roar of engines shook the ground below as she executed another flawless dive and roll sequence, the storm whipping around her metal and rain slicing through the air like knives. The SEALs and the Admiral remained frozen, watching each move, calculating the skilled timing and audacity required to survive this fly. The storm clouds above thickened once more, lightning illuminating the runway below. In sharp white flashes, Elena Ramirez leveled the A-10, momentarily scanning the terrain below her HUD, alive with indicators, signals, and targets. Each readout a puzzle, to solve a danger to anticipate, and a calculation to execute. Her hands moved instinctively on the controls, every adjustment precise, measured, and instantaneous, as though the aircraft and her mind were a single entity operating in perfect synchronization. Captain Morales watched from the hangar steps, his eyes narrowed, focused on her every move. The SEALs behind him exchanged tense glances, muscles tight, adrenaline rushing through their veins. They had already witnessed skill, audacity, and nerve. Yet now the simulated combat engagement added an entirely new layer of threat, complexity, and danger. Every second mattered, every maneuver a matter of survival in a scenario designed to push the limits of any pilot, and Elena handled it as if she had done nothing else in her life. The radar beeped, signaling multiple inbound targets fast approaching from the north and east. The storm made visibility near zero, forcing Elena to rely on instruments' instinct and lightning-quick decision-making. She banked sharply, pulling a near-impossible climb to avoid the first wave weaving through clouds and rain like a phantom. The roar of engines reverberated in her chest, every fiber of her being focused entirely on navigation, threat assessment, and engagement timing. The SEALs and Captain Morales could do nothing but watch in awe, disbelief, and mounting tension as she threaded the aircraft through invisible danger. Jenkins felt his stomach tighten as the A-10 dove, suddenly descending at a steep angle, skimming treetops before pulling up into a sharp roll sequence, each movement calculated to avoid collisions with obstacles and maximize firing angles for simulated targets. The storm intensified, wind gusting unpredictably, rain stinging exposed faces and obscuring vision. Yet Elena never faltered. Each throttle adjustment, control, input, and maneuver executed with absolute precision, leaving the SEALs murmuring under their breath, unable to fully comprehend the skill, nerve, and courage on display. Lightning struck close enough to illuminate the cockpit, revealing Elena's calm face, expressionless yet focused, every micro-movement, calculated, every glance, purposeful. Her eyes flicked from HUD to horizon, scanning for new threats, calculating trajectories, and engagement windows simultaneously. Her hands never hesitated, every input perfectly timed, and executed the roar of engines and the fury of the storm, blending into a symphony of controlled chaos around her, leaving the observers on the ground, frozen in anticipation and disbelief. Suddenly, the radar indicated an incoming high-speed simulated missile. Elena adjusted throttle and banked sharply, rolling to evade the incoming fire. Her instinctive calculation of distance, speed, angle, and trajectory allowed her to maneuver the aircraft in a way that seemed impossible from the ground. The SEALs gasped, their eyes widening as she executed the maneuver, perfectly disappearing briefly into clouds and re-emerging moments later aligned for a counter. Engagement strike. Her focus unbroken, her nerve steady, her skill unmatched, leaving the tension on the airfield. Palpable, Captain. Morales instinctively stepped back, shielding his eyes from a spray of rain and debris kicked up by the engines. He knew the risk she had taken maneuvering through the storm solo, the aircraft threading clouds and simulated fire with almost supernatural precision. His mind raced, calculating the probability of success. Every action Elena had taken, yet the results were undeniable, flawless execution, flawless timing, and a level of courage that forced even him to respect the name. Iron Widow. Jenkins gritted his teeth as she executed a vertical climb, followed by a barrel roll banking toward another set of simulated targets. The storm seemed almost alive around the aircraft, wind gusting unpredictably, hail striking the fuselage, rain whipping at every exposed surface. Yet Elena maintained complete control, each maneuver fluid, natural, and lethal in appearance. The SEALs held their breath each motion, leaving suspense for the next action, the next twist, the next impossible feat they were witnessing in real time. The radar beeped again, signaling the final wave of incoming targets. She dove sharply, pulling into a tight roll, then leveled momentarily, aligning perfectly with simulated threats before pulling up into a climb that defied logic. Each motion calculated, instinctive, and performed with breathtaking precision. The roar of engines and the fury of the storm made every observer aware of the audacity, the nerve and skill required to survive and succeed, leaving the entire team suspended between fear, excitement, and awe as she leveled the aircraft above the storm clouds. Elena adjusted throttles, easing into a controlled flyby over the wet airfield, rain still hammering the fuselage visibility. Poor yet instruments and instinct guiding her every movement, Captain Morales exhaled, finally lowering his hands, the tension leaving his body replaced with admiration and disbelief. The SEALs whispered amongst themselves, awed by what they had witnessed, understanding for the first time the full weight and power behind the call sign, Iron Widow, and leaving the story suspended with anticipation of what her next move might be and how far her skill could reach. The storm above showed no mercy, clouds twisting violently and wind gusting unpredictably. The A-10 rocked and pitched as Elena Ramirez maintained absolute control. Her eyes scanned HUD and horizon every second, a battle against nature and the simulated enemies below. The roar of engines filled the cabin and the airfield, watching teams' hearts pounding as the aircraft sliced through sheets of rain with precision and nerve, each maneuver daring and exact, leaving no margin for error. Captain Morales leaned forward, unable to take his eyes from her every adjustment of throttle, a tiny tilt, a calculated roll, every movement showing control over forces most could not imagine. The SEALs behind him held their breath, each new maneuver an escalation in suspense, as Elena dove sharply toward the valley below, threading through imaginary enemy positions and debris markers placed to test skill and nerve, every second heightened. Tension as the storm intensified, visibility near zero, and the wind threatening to throw the aircraft off course, leaving every heart pounding with anticipation. Jenkins gritted his teeth as the A-10 executed a steep vertical climb, pulling sharply into a barrel roll, then banking low, skimming treetops before leveling with perfect alignment. Elena's focus absolute, her instincts flawless, and her nerve unshakable. The storm whipped around her metal and rain slicing past the cockpit as the aircraft defied gravity and chaos. The SEALs watched mesmerized, adrenaline mixing with awe, wondering how a single pilot could manipulate such a machine in conditions that would terrify even the most seasoned veterans, leaving suspense dangling. Over every motion, lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley below, revealing wet terrain obstacles and simulated hostile positions. Each flash revealed Elena's precise movements as she twisted, rolled, and climbed the aircraft, responding instantly to every changing condition, radar blips and wind gusts. Her hands danced over controls, adjusting throttles, ailerons, flaps, and rudder, coordinating every action with instinctive timing. The roar of engines echoed in the storm like thunder competing with the sky as she prepared for the next impossible maneuver. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on HUD, a simulated high-speed threat approaching from the east. Elena banked sharply, rolling the aircraft through a tight sequence of evasive maneuvers, barely clearing the obstacle as the SEALs gasped, their eyes wide at the audacity. The storm seemed to push against her, every second wind, gusts threatening control. Yet she responded instantly, balancing the aircraft between physics and instinct, every movement calculated, precise, and flawless, leaving suspense hanging in the storm, heavy and tangible. Captain Morales stepped back, shielding his eyes from rain and spray of debris, the tension coiling in his chest as he realized the danger Elena had accepted. By flying solo through such a tempest, each dive, each roll, each climb required split-second decisions and perfect timing. The margin for error non-existent, yet the A-10 moved as if alive, obeying her will, threading the storm like a phantom fighter, capable of impossible maneuvers, leaving the observers on the ground, frozen in amazement and disbelief. Jenkins clenched his fists as she executed a low-altitude approach toward the final engagement zone, skimming wet rooftops and treetops with millimeters to spare. The SEALs watched as the aircraft disappeared briefly into the clouds, only to re-emerge moments later in perfect alignment for a final strike against simulated targets. Every input, throttle bank, and roll performed with perfection. The storm around her, testing skill and nerve at every instant, leaving tension high and awe deeper than words could express. The radar indicated last wave of targets incoming high speed. Simulated threats converging from multiple angles. Elena adjusted heading and throttle banking, sharply climbing and rolling, executing maneuvers that seemed impossible, threading the needle between physics and chaos. The SEALs whispered among themselves, hearts racing, marveling at the courage, nerve, and audacity on display. Their skepticism from earlier melted into total admiration, understanding for the first time the weight behind the call sign Iron Widow, leaving the story suspended as every observer waited for the outcome of this final sequence. Lightning illuminated, her cockpit revealing a calm, focused expression. Every glance calculated, every decision instinctive. She executed a perfect vertical roll and dive sequence, leveling. The storm began to lose its fury, leaving only sheets of rain and occasional gusts of wind. The A-10 leveled above the wet airfield. Elena Ramirez adjusted throttles, easing into a smooth approach, the roar of engines still reverberating through the storm-soaked tarmac. Her eyes scanned instruments and horizon, every motion deliberate, precise, and confident, while the SEALs below held their breath, watching the aircraft descend with impossible control and nerve. The adrenaline of the flight still pulsed in their veins, leaving them tense and silent. Captain Morales stepped forward, shielding his face from rain and spray from the aircraft as it approached the landing zone. Each movement of the jet seemed calculated to defy physics, threading the slippery runway with millimeter precision. Elena executed a final bank and roll sequence, aligning perfectly with the strip. Her hands danced over the controls, adjusting flaps and throttles while maintaining perfect balance over the slick surface. The SEALs exchanged astonished glances, their skepticism replaced by awe at the skill and courage on display, leaving suspense heavy in the air. Jenkins felt his stomach tighten as the A-10 touched down with a controlled jolt, tires gripping the wet, runway engines growling against wind and resistance. The aircraft skidded slightly in perfect control, settling fully as Elena lowered the nose and applied brakes. The SEALs cheered quietly for fear of disturbing the delicate control, yet their eyes never left the jet, marveling at the impossible maneuvers that had brought her home safely. Each man felt the tension finally release, leaving them both relieved and in awe of what they had witnessed. The name Iron Widow now engraved in their minds, as more than a call sign, a symbol of unmatched courage. Captain Morales moved quickly toward the ramp, signaling readiness to disembark, while the ground crew checked equipment and systems, ensuring everything was operational. Despite exhaustion mud, soaked uniforms, and rain-soaked hair, every soldier felt a surge of respect for Elena and the aircraft that had performed flawlessly through the storm. The SEALs helped each other steady themselves, noting the precise timing and nerve required to maintain control during every maneuver, leaving suspense and admiration lingering like the final echo of the engines. Elena climbed down from the cockpit. Her suit soaked her expression, calm yet satisfied. Her eyes met the Admiral, who had remained silent since the landing, disbelief and awe etched across his face. He extended a hand, and for the first time his tone carried respect rather than skepticism. The SEALs gathered around, murmuring congratulations and questions, yet none could fully comprehend the skill, courage, and nerve required to thread the storm alone. The story of Iron Widow had become legend in moments, leaving anticipation and awe suspended in every heart. Jenkins watched as the crew and SEALs assisted the pilot toward the briefing area, each step cautious, careful after the tension of the storm and combat scenario. The hangar lights reflected off wet uniforms and aircraft, leaving streaks of color across the scene. Every man and woman felt the weight of what had occurred, understanding that survival and skill had depended entirely on Elena's nerve precision and mastery. The SEALs whispered among themselves, replaying dives, rolls, and maneuvers, still catching their breath, the suspense lingering in the form of unspoken awe and respect. Captain Morales finally addressed the group, briefing them on next steps, debriefing protocols, and equipment checks. Yet his words were punctuated with silent admiration for the pilot who had executed the impossible. The storm had tested them all, pushed every calculation, every skill, and every nerve to the limit. Yet Iron Widow had emerged, flawless, precise, and alive. Each soldier understood the magnitude of the demonstration, the courage required, and the audacity displayed, leaving suspense hanging like clouds still overhead and anticipation of future missions impossible to shake. The Admiral remained in the background, watching Elena check instruments and converse calmly with ground crew. His mind replayed every maneuver, every risk, every split second that had saved lives and preserved the mission. The SEALs moved among themselves, recounting details of dives, low-altitude passes, and evasive rolls, each retelling more awed than the last. The name Iron Widow was no longer a call sign. It had become legend, a testament to courage, skill, and nerve, leaving suspense and awe lingering long after the engines had quieted. As the storm finally subsided, the wet tarmac gleamed under the dim light, reflecting both aircraft and soldiers exhausted, relieved, and alive. The SEALs gathered their gear, assisted wounded, and cleaned equipment, their minds still processing the intensity and skill displayed. The pilot of the A-10 had performed an impossible feat, threading the storm alone, commanding the aircraft with precision, nerve, and courage, leaving every observer suspended between admiration and disbelief, anticipating the next story to unfold. The storm had finally passed, leaving only a drizzle and a gray mist over the runway. The A-10 stood gleaming wet under the dim hangar lights, engines quiet now yet echoing in memory. Elena Ramirez leaned against the fuselage, checking instruments and systems. One last time, her expression calm, focused, and thoughtful. The SEALs moved around, assisting with gear and checking equipment, exhausted, relieved, yet still buzzing with adrenaline from the impossible maneuvers they had just witnessed. Captain Morales approached Elena. His steps slow, deliberate, his eyes reflecting awe and respect. He extended a hand, which she shook firmly, their gazes locking for a moment in silent acknowledgement of skill, courage, and nerve beyond measure. The SEALs watched in quiet reverence, knowing that what they had just seen was not training simulation but a demonstration of mastery and audacity that would be remembered for years. The call sign Iron Widow had transformed into legend, embodying courage, precision, and fearlessness, leaving suspense and anticipation lingering in the damp air. Jenkins exhaled, finally, letting tension drain from his muscles as he recounted the dive's roles and low-altitude maneuvers in his mind. He glanced at his comrades who shared the same mixture of relief and awe. Their eyes still followed Elena as she moved efficiently, inspecting the aircraft and coordinating with ground crew. Every action precise, deliberate, and calm, as if the storm and chaos had never existed. The SEALs whispered among themselves in quiet admiration, realizing for the first time the full weight of skill, nerve, and courage required to thread the storm solo and emerge unscathed. The Admiral finally approached the group, his expression serious yet tinged with disbelief. He nodded toward Elena, acknowledging the perfection of her performance and the life-saving skill she had displayed in extreme conditions. His previous doubts erased, replaced entirely by respect and awe. Every SEAL felt the gravity of the moment, understanding that survival had depended entirely on her nerve precision and instinct. The call sign Iron Widow had proven itself and left everyone suspended between admiration and disbelief, wondering what she would do next. Captain Morales gathered the SEALs for a debriefing, moving them away from the aircraft and storm-soaked tarmac. He spoke calmly, outlining mission reports, equipment checks, and tactical observations, yet his words were punctuated with silent reverence for the pilot who had executed the impossible. The SEALs listened, intently, their minds replaying each maneuver from dives and rolls to evasive climbs, threading through clouds and simulated fire, leaving awe and suspense lingering with every memory of the mission. Elena stood slightly apart, watching her team debrief and interact, her eyes scanning for any indication of equipment issues or injuries. Her thoughts replayed each maneuver, each decision and split-second calculation that had preserved life and accomplished objectives in conditions most would call impossible. The SEALs occasionally glanced back at her, whispering under their breath, discussing maneuvers and skill. They could not fully comprehend her nerve, precision, and mastery, yet they knew they had witnessed history, leaving suspense and wonder hanging in the misty air. The Admiral finally spoke to the gathered SEALs, praising their resilience, coordination, and focus, while emphasizing the unmatched skill displayed by Elena Ramirez. The group nodded silently, understanding that survival had been ensured not by numbers or strategy alone, but by audacity, nerve, and mastery of skill, displayed in a single pilot threading storm and simulated combat with perfection. The SEALs felt pride tempered with awe as they realized the true weight of what they had experienced, and the story of Iron Widow would be retold in hushed tones for years to come, leaving anticipation and mystery. Unresolved, Jenkins approached Elena, finally thanking her for the precision, courage, and nerve that had ensured their survival. His words simple yet heartfelt yet. She only nodded, her expression calm, confident, and slightly distant, as if already thinking of the next mission. The SEALs gathered around, cameras, phones, and notebooks, documenting every detail, every maneuver, and every moment that had left them suspended between fear, awe, and admiration. Each detail added to the legend, leaving suspense, and the memory of the impossible threaded through storm clouds still lingering in the background, as the hangar Doors closed behind the storm, dissipating clouds and dripping rain. The SEALs gathered their gear, reflecting on every roll dive and evasive maneuver they had witnessed. Elena Ramirez moved to the edge of the tarmac, gazing at the horizon, the A-10. Quiet beneath her, yet radiating the same energy that had driven every action in the storm. She exhaled slowly, knowing the mission was complete, yet leaving an unspoken sense of anticipation in the air.